I need to tell you something. Something I've kept to myself for a long time now. Because every time I try to explain it, I sound crazy. But I know what I saw. And I know, without a single doubt in my mind, that something was watching me from those woods. Something that wasn't human. I'm going to share 3 experiences with you tonight. And that third one, that's the one I still can't shake. Even now. People always romanticize Alaska. They picture the northern lights. The vast, open wilderness. The rugged, simple beauty of living off the land. And yeah, all of that is real. But there's another side to this place that nobody talks about. The winter darkness. See, during summer, the sun barely sets. You feel alive, energized, like anything is possible. But when winter comes, the light disappears. And the silence, God, the silence. It's not peaceful. It's suffocating. It presses against you from all sides until you can feel it in your chest. In your throat. I live alone out here. Have for years now. My cabin sits miles away from the nearest town. Just a small wooden structure with a wood-burning stove and enough supplies to last me through the worst months. Most of the time, I'm okay with it. The solitude becomes familiar. Comfortable even. But one night in late January, something shifted. I was sitting by the fire, a book open on my lap. I remember the way the flames crackled and popped, sending little sparks up toward the ceiling. The warmth felt good against my face, but I couldn't focus on the words in front of me. My eyes kept drifting to the windows. Now, when it's dark out here, and I mean truly dark, the windows become mirrors. You can't see outside. You only see the reflection of the room, the fire, yourself. But that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was on the other side of that glass, watching. I told myself to stop being ridiculous. I'd been out here for years. I knew the sounds of the forest, the wind, the occasional animal moving through the snow. But this was different. The silence felt heavy, intentional, like the whole world was holding its breath. I went to bed early that night, pulled the blankets tight around me, closed my eyes. But sleep wouldn't come, because somewhere deep in my gut, I knew. I wasn't alone anymore. Quick pause here. If you're already feeling that chill down your spine, leave a comment. Tell me honestly, could you handle a winter out here? Completely alone? Miles from anyone? And if you're new to this channel, go ahead and subscribe. Tap that bell, because what I'm about to describe next, it still doesn't make sense to me. The next morning, I woke up feeling strange, unsettled. I told myself I was being paranoid. Too much isolation, too much silence. I got dressed, pulled on my boots, and stepped outside to check my firewood supply. That's when I saw them. Tracks. In the fresh snow. Circling my cabin. My stomach dropped. I've lived in Alaska long enough to recognize prints. Wolf tracks are narrow and direct. Bear tracks are heavy and wide. Moose leave deep, clumsy impressions. These weren't any of those. They were large. Almost the size of a human footprint. But the pattern was wrong. The stride was too long. Too uneven. A strange, loping gait that made no biological sense. The tracks went all the way around my cabin. They came right up to the windows, close enough that whatever made them could have pressed its face against the glass. And then they disappeared into the tree line. I stood there in the cold, my breath forming clouds in front of me, trying to think of a reasonable explanation. Maybe a trapper passing through? No. No one travels through here in deep winter without making contact. That's just how it works. You don't sneak around someone's cabin in the middle of nowhere. And these prints, they weren't made by boots. I went back inside and locked the door. For the first time since moving out here, I actually checked the lock. For the next few days, I couldn't relax. Every time I stepped outside, I scanned the tree line. Every shadow made me pause. Every crack of a branch made my heart jump. The forest had changed. What once felt like peaceful solitude now felt like exposure. Like I was standing on a stage, and somewhere in the darkness, there was an audience I couldn't see. I tried to go about my normal routine. Chopping wood, melting snow for water, cooking simple meals over the stove. But I was always looking over my shoulder, always listening. One evening, it must have been 4 or 5 days after I first found the tracks, the sun started to set early. That pale, weak winter sun that barely warms anything before it disappears. And I made a decision. I was going to follow those tracks. Looking back now, I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe I thought I'd find an explanation. Maybe I just couldn't stand not knowing anymore. I bundled up in my warmest layers. I grabbed my rifle, and I stepped into the frozen wilderness. The tracks were faint now, days old, partially covered by light snowfall. But I could still make them out, those strange, elongated impressions leading away from my cabin, deeper into the forest. I followed them. The farther I walked, the quieter everything became. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of my boots and the sound of my own breathing. Do you know what true silence sounds like? It's not peaceful. It's oppressive. It makes the smallest sounds, your heartbeat, your breath, seem impossibly loud, almost deafening. I started to second-guess myself. What if I can't find my way back? What if darkness falls before I reach the cabin? What am I even looking for? But I kept walking. The tracks led me to a small clearing, maybe 50 yards across. The trees formed a rough circle around an open patch of snow. And that's where the tracks stopped. Just stopped. No continuation. No indication of where whatever made them had gone. It was like the creature had walked to the center of this clearing and then simply vanished. I stood there, my breath hanging in the frozen air, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. This doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense. I was about to turn around, about to give up and head back, when something made me stop. A feeling. You know that sensation when someone's standing behind you? When you can feel their presence even though you haven't seen or heard them. It was like that, but stronger, more certain. Slowly, I turned my head, and I saw it, at the edge of the clearing, half hidden in the shadows between two trees. A figure. It was tall, taller than any person should be, and thin, impossibly thin, like a skeleton draped in pale skin. Its limbs were too long. Its proportions were all wrong. And its face. I don't know how to describe it. Where the eyes should have been, there were only dark hollows, deep pits that seemed to absorb the fading light. And its mouth was twisted into something that might have been a grin, but there was nothing human about it. It was watching me. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, drowning out everything else. The figure didn't move either. It just stood there, still as stone, staring. Slowly, so slowly my arms ached, I raised my rifle. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep it steady. And as I lifted the barrel toward that thing, it stepped backward, one smooth, silent motion. And then it was gone, melted into the shadows like it had never been there at all. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just ran. Branches whipped at my face. Snow crunched and scattered beneath my boots. I didn't care about the noise I was making. Didn't care about anything except getting back to the cabin. I burst through the door and slammed it behind me. My hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to throw the bolt. I sat by the fire that night, rifle across my lap, watching the windows until the first gray light of dawn crept across the snow. The next morning, I stepped outside on trembling legs. The tracks around my cabin were gone. Fresh snow had fallen in the night, covering everything in a clean, white layer, as if nothing had ever been there. I never saw the figure again. But the fear? The fear stayed. It's still here, honestly. Even now, years later. The silence of the Alaskan wilderness, the thing I once loved most about this place, became a reminder. I wasn't alone out there. I never had been. And whatever watched me from those shadows, it's still out there somewhere. Waiting. Okay. Deep breath. That was the first story. Before we move on to the second one, I need to ask you something. If this is resonating with you, if you're feeling what I felt, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this video reach more people who love these kinds of stories. And drop a comment. Tell me what you would have done. Would you have followed those tracks? Or would you have stayed inside and tried to forget? Alright. Story 2. This one takes place in a completely different setting. But that feeling of being watched? It's the same. I had been planning this camping trip for months. Life had gotten heavy. Work was overwhelming. Relationships were strained. I needed to get away. Truly away. No phone service. No emails. No noise. Just me and the wilderness. I loaded up my SUV with everything I could possibly need. Tent, sleeping bag, food, water, first aid kit. And okay, maybe a couple bottles of wine. This was supposed to be a reset, after all. The drive took hours. But with every mile, I felt the tension in my shoulders start to release. The highway gave way to smaller roads. The smaller roads gave way to dirt paths. And eventually I was alone. Just me and the trees. I found a perfect spot by late afternoon. A small clearing with soft ground, surrounded by tall pines, and a break in the canopy that would give me an incredible view of the stars. Setting up camp felt almost meditative. pitching the tent, arranging my supplies, gathering firewood. By the time the sun started to set, I had a small fire crackling in front of me and a glass of wine in my hand. The flames danced and popped. The leaves rustled gently in the breeze. Above me, the first stars were beginning to appear. I remember thinking, this is exactly what I needed. I don't know when I fell asleep. One moment I was watching the stars, counting constellations, feeling at peace for the first time in months. The next moment I was awake, and something was wrong. The fire had burned down to faint embers. The air had turned cold, much colder than before. But that wasn't what woke me. It was a sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, a low, distant murmur filtering through the trees. But as I listened, really listened, I realized it wasn't wind at all. It was voices, chanting, low and rhythmic, rising and falling in a pattern that felt ancient, deliberate, coming from somewhere deep in the forest. I sat up, my heart suddenly racing. What the hell is that? I strained to make out words, but the language, if it even was a language, was nothing I recognized. The sound was hypnotic, unsettling, like something out of a nightmare you can't quite remember. And it was getting closer. I scrambled into my tent, hands shaking as I grabbed my knife. I lay there in the darkness, clutching the blade to my chest, trying to control my breathing. Nobody knows I'm here. Nobody can find me. I'm safe. I'm safe. I'm safe. But the chanting continued, growing louder, more distinct. Multiple voices now, overlapping, building in intensity. And then it stopped. Just like that. Complete silence. Somehow that was worse. I lay there for what felt like hours, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. Eventually, I don't know how, exhaustion pulled me under, and I slipped into a restless, nightmare-filled sleep. Okay, pause. What do you think was making that sound? I need your theories. Drop them in the comments. Was it human? Something else entirely? I'm genuinely curious what you think. Morning came like a gift. Sunlight streaming through the trees. Birds chirping somewhere in the distance. The fire pit cold and gray. Everything looked normal. I almost laughed at myself. All that fear, all that panic, for what? Probably just hikers in the distance. Sound carries strangely in the wilderness. My imagination had gotten the better of me. I started packing up breakfast supplies, ready to shake off the unease and enjoy my day. That's when I heard it. A knock. 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 Soft. Almost hesitant. Coming from my SUV. My blood turned to ice. Slowly, so slowly it felt like moving through water, I turned around. There was a figure standing by the driver's side door. Tall. Thin. Dressed in dark, shapeless clothing that seemed to absorb the morning light. The face was completely hidden beneath a deep hood. The figure didn't move. Didn't speak. Just stood there. I don't remember deciding to scream. It just happened, a raw, primal sound that tore out of my throat and echoed through the trees. And then the figure ran. It moved so fast. Faster than I could process. One moment it was standing by my car, and the next it was disappearing into the forest, swallowed by the shadows between the trees. I stood frozen, my heart hammering, my mind racing. Who was that? How did they find me? How did they get so close without me hearing a single footstep? I didn't wait to find answers. I threw my gear into the SUV, tent half folded, supplies scattered everywhere. I didn't care. I just needed to leave. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely get the key in the ignition. I drove. Didn't look back. Just drove. Hours later, after putting as many miles between myself and that clearing as possible, I found another spot to camp. This time, I didn't light a fire. Didn't drink any wine. I sat in my tent in complete darkness, knife in my hand, listening to every single sound the forest made. Every rustle of leaves. Every snap of a twig. Every distant animal call. My mind kept replaying that hooded figure. The way it stood so still. The unnatural speed when it ran. And underneath it all, like a soundtrack I couldn't escape, the memory of that chanting. I barely slept. The next morning, my last morning, though I didn't know it yet, I packed up to leave. That's when I noticed them. Footprints. Large. Deep. Fresh in the morning dew. They came from the tree line. They led directly to my tent. And then they stopped. Right outside the door where I had been sleeping. Whoever, that figure was, they had come back in the night. They had stood inches from where I lay, watching me sleep. I threw everything in the car and left. I never went back to that forest. Not once. The peace I had been seeking was destroyed. The solitude I had craved became a source of terror. And sometimes late at night when everything is quiet, I still hear that chanting, echoing somewhere in the back of my mind. All right, one more story left. And this last one, this is the one that changed me. But first, if you've made it this far, I genuinely appreciate you. This community means everything to me. So do me a favor, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And share this video with a friend who loves creepy stories. They'll thank you for it. Okay, story 3. Let's do this. This happened in late November. I had always been drawn to the Alaskan wilderness, the vast, frozen landscapes, the untouched beauty, the feeling of being truly alone with nature. This trip was supposed to be special. A full week in a remote cabin, far from any town or road. Just me and the wilderness. The hike took an entire day. The air was so cold it stung my lungs with every breath. The snow crunched beneath my boots. The only sounds were my footsteps and the occasional creak of tree branches under the weight of ice. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was already sinking behind the mountains. The cabin was small, barely more than 4 walls and a tin roof half buried in snow. I pushed open the door, stepped inside, and immediately started building a fire. That first night was perfect. The flames crackled in the small stove. Warmth slowly filled the room. I made a simple dinner, read a few chapters of a book, and fell into the deepest sleep I'd had in months. The silence wrapped around me like a blanket. But the second day, that's when everything changed. I spent the morning exploring the area around the cabin. The landscape was stunning, snow-covered trees sparkling in the weak winter sunlight, the air so clean and cold it almost hurt to breathe. I felt at peace, truly at peace. But as the day wore on, something shifted. It started as a feeling, subtle at first, like a whisper at the edge of my consciousness. Something is watching you. I tried to shake it off. I'd been out here dozens of times. I knew the wilderness played tricks on your mind when you were alone. But the feeling wouldn't leave. By the time I headed back to the cabin at sunset, it had grown into something I couldn't ignore. A constant, nagging sensation that eyes were following my every move. That night, the silence felt different. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was oppressive, heavy, like the air itself had thickened. I sat by the fire, trying to read, but I couldn't focus. Every creak of the cabin made me jump. Every shadow cast by the flames seemed to move and shift. You're being paranoid. There's nothing out there. You're alone. But was I? I went to bed early, hoping sleep would calm my nerves. It didn't. I woke up in the middle of the night. Something had pulled me out of sleep, some sound, some disturbance. I lay there in the darkness, heart pounding, listening. And then I heard it. A low rhythmic sound. Thump, thump, thump. Like footsteps in the snow. Coming from outside the cabin. Getting closer. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. I lay there, frozen, as the sound grew louder and nearer. Thump, thump, thump. Right outside my window. And then silence. Absolute, complete silence. I don't know how long I lay there. Seconds? Minutes? It felt like hours. Finally, I gathered every ounce of courage I had and crept toward the window. My hand was trembling as I pulled back the curtain. Moonlight flooded the snow-covered landscape, turning everything silver and blue. And there, at the edge of the forest, a figure. It stood perfectly still between 2 trees. Tall, impossibly thin. Its body was wrong, proportions stretched and elongated, like a shadow that had learned to stand upright. And it was looking directly at me. Not moving, not making a sound, just watching. I couldn't scream, couldn't run. I just stood there frozen, staring back at this thing that shouldn't exist. Time seemed to stop. Then, acting on pure instinct, I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it at the window. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the trees, the snow, the space where the figure had been standing. Empty. Nothing there. I stood at that window until dawn, shaking, watching, waiting for the figure to return. It never did. The moment the sky began to lighten, I made my decision. I was leaving. Immediately. I threw my supplies into my pack without any order or care. I didn't eat breakfast. I didn't take one last look at the beautiful landscape. I just walked. Fast. Then faster. The whole time, I felt eyes on my back. Every rustle in the trees, every crack of a branch, sent jolts of adrenaline through my body. I kept looking over my shoulder, kept expecting to see that figure following me through the trees. By the time I reached the town, I was practically running. The lights of civilization, the houses, the cars, the ordinary sounds of human life had never felt so welcoming. I never went back to that cabin, never returned to that part of the wilderness, because I understood something that day, something fundamental. The wilderness is not empty. We like to think we're alone out there, that we're the only observers, the only consciousness moving through those silent spaces. But we're not. Something else is out there, watching, waiting, and I don't ever want to find out what it wants. So those are my 3 experiences. 3 times when the wilderness showed me something I couldn't explain, something that still haunts me. Maybe there are logical explanations for everything I saw. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe isolation does strange things to a person. But deep down, I don't think so. I think there are things in this world, in the dark places, the quiet places, the spaces where humans rarely go, that we're not meant to understand. And maybe that's okay. Maybe some mysteries are supposed to stay mysteries. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you. Genuinely. It means more than I can express. I want to hear from you now. Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? Something that still keeps you up at night? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if this video resonated with you, hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Share this with someone who loves the unexplained. Maybe watch it together with the lights off. Until next time, stay safe out there, and maybe think twice before venturing into the wilderness alone.